Okay, so this presentation is to help guide you on how you can write your story, also called your personal statement, for your asylum case. Now, when you apply for asylum, there's spaces on the form I-589 where you explain the reasons that you are applying for asylum, and you do need to fill out that application. But oftentimes, there's a lot to your story, and it can be helpful to include an additional, your full statement explaining all the reasons that you're applying for asylum. And you can include this when you file for your I-589 by saying that you've attached an additional story, or you can submit it later. You can submit it, towards the time of your interview. But in all cases, it's good to do this also to just get, to help yourself remember everything that's in your story, because definitely a lot happened. And hopefully this presentation will guide you on the best way to organize everything that happened. So let me just move this. What is your story? So the whole story about why you're applying for asylum is probably very, very complicated. So when we're talking about your story for asylum, we really want to focus on the elements of asylum. So the elements of asylum we'll go through, but those are the legal requirements. And then how can you present them chronologically, meaning starting in the past and then going to the present? And how can you present them very clearly? That is your goal, to sort of create this narrative, this very clear story that shows how you qualify for asylum from everything that has happened in your life. So it's good to first think, what do you need to prove? You need to prove that you belong to one of these social groups, or that you, for one of the protected grounds, so your race, religion, nationality, political affiliation, or another social group. You have to prove that you were harmed, so in the past, and or that you will be harmed. So maybe you were harmed and you are also going to be harmed, or maybe you were not harmed in the past, but now something happened and you will be harmed in the future. So you need to explain what that harm is, and that you're going to be harmed because of that. And when I say that, I mean your race, religion, nationality, political affiliation, or another social group. And that's really the bulk of asylum. And finally, you have to prove that your government, when I say your government, meaning your country of citizenship, or where you were last living, will not or cannot protect people who belong to that group. Or sometimes it's the government itself that is causing you harm. So what else will asylum officers ask about? And I created this, more in terms of as if you're applying with the USCIS, but it would be similar if you were in court. So they would want to know about any past travel to the US or to any other countries. And the point of those questions would be to see, why didn't you apply for asylum if you were in the US before, or why didn't you apply for asylum in a different country? If you entered with a visa, what you said to get your visa and what you said when you entered the US. So if you provided perhaps any false information when getting your visa, or any false information when you entered the US, you would want to approach it and explain why that happened. It's not necessarily going to be a problem, but it should be approached. And then finally, if you're filing after 1 year, why? Why after 1 year? Because there's a 1-year filing deadline. And there can be exceptions to the 1-year filing deadline, but these would also need to be explained. Well, the asylum officer will ask about it, and you should also explain it in your story. So what are the suggestions, some suggestions for writing your story? Take your time. Don't write it all in one day. Give yourself several weeks to write it little by little, because it's a lot. And you might want to organize it in a way that it's easy for the officer to see the different parts of your story. So, it depends on your story, but you might want to, it needs to be organized in a way that's easy to follow. And along with that, it's try to make it chronological. So past to present. And if you don't remember something exactly, say so. Okay, if let's say you were assaulted by a group of people and you can't remember how many there were, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, don't just make something up and say 6. Say, I can't really remember. There was so much happening. I was disoriented. I think there might have been between 3 to 6. Okay, tell the truth and say what happened. And if you don't remember exactly what happened, say why you don't remember it happened. So your areas to focus on. So, your entry, travel, applying for asylum. This I would even say is not necessarily as important for your story. Maybe you don't need to include it in your story, but definitely be prepared to answer questions about it at your interview. But all the rest you do definitely need. So your protected ground, in other words, what is it about you that is the reason you're applying for asylum? Excuse me. All of your past harm, so everything that happened to you related to this ground. And then you want to think about the future. So you're here now in the US applying for asylum, but if you went back, what would happen to you in the future? So every harm related to that ground that might happen to you in the future and why you think that would happen to you. And then it's good to include some information about what you intend to do in the United States, what you are doing, just to show that you have good moral character. And then finally, you want to include any corroborating evidence. Corroborating evidence means documents, other evidence that shows that what you're saying is, in fact, true. So we'll go through entry just quickly, but some of the things that they might ask you at your asylum interview, and again, maybe or maybe not, you don't want to include it in your story, but oftentimes they'll ask, when you applied for your visa, what did you say in your visa, and does any of it conflict? And what happened at the border, and does any of that information conflict? And one example that just came to mind right now that I'm thinking of, someone once was applying based on their sexual orientation, but at the border, they said that they were going to meet their partner who happened to be opposite sex. And it came up at their interview because it was a conflict between their claim. And, the reason the individual said what they said at the border was because they were scared. They just wanted to get into the United States. And, it wasn't, any sort of romantic partner, but it definitely brought doubts to the asylum officer's mind. So, if there's something like that, something that really conflicts with your the reason you're applying for asylum, you might want to address it just to show that you're not hiding any information, and you can explain it, right? You can really explain why you did it. Again, a lot of questions that they ask when you're at your asylum interview is, how did you learn about asylum? Did you intend to apply for asylum in the US? Did anyone help you? And why did it take so long between, if it did, between when you entered and when you filed your asylum application? So this is more just to be prepared for your asylum interview. But again, if there's something in here that really conflicts with your story, you might want to address it also in your written story. Another thing that should come up in your story and will definitely be asked at your interview is if you lived anywhere else before coming to the US, and if so, why you didn't apply for asylum there, or what the conditions were like there. Perhaps you came to the US but were living in another country for 2 years as a tourist. What was going on there that you couldn't apply for asylum there or permanent residence there? There might have been no way to do it. Or maybe the country was very xenophobic and not welcoming to people of your citizenship, your nationality. So those things would need to be explained. And if you ever had permanent residence in another country, or if you're a dual citizen, meaning a double citizen, this could potentially be an issue for asylum. So, if this is the situation, you may want to talk in more detail with an immigration lawyer. And even if you don't currently have 2 passports, if your parents were born somewhere else, and through them, it could potentially be possible to get citizenship somewhere else, you may also want to talk with an attorney. Okay, but now we're getting into the main part of your story and what's really very important. So first and foremost, what is your protected ground? What is it about your identity that is the reason that you can no longer live in your country of citizenship? So you need to explain, what is this protected ground, why you belong to it, and how your country, people in your country, or how the government in your country views, how they look at people who hold this identity. So let's look at some examples, because it can be a little confusing. So let's say you're applying based on your religion. So, and because you're a religious minority in your country. So you want to show, one, that you actually hold this religious belief. So did you go to a place of worship? Did when you were in your home country, is there something about your name that makes it recognizable that you are of this religious faith, or otherwise, right? Secondly, that you're perceived to hold this belief. So again, like maybe there's something about your name, or perhaps you live in a certain area in your country where people of the same minority live, or maybe it's even more explicit than that. Maybe it's on some official documentation. So how is it that people know that you hold this belief? And that your country, that the government or people in your country regard this religious group differently than the majority, and of course that they persecute it, right? So what happens to people who hold this religious faith in your country of citizenship? So those are some of the things that you want to explore to establish the protected ground. Oh, and I have them here. Were you born into this religion or did you convert? What are the beliefs, the main tenets of it? How is it different? Uh, did you go to classes? Were there celebrations? Why is this religion important to you? Do you have a manner of dress that identifies you? So these are all sort of questions, you know, you could certainly pause this video and look at it, that you might want to think about. Another example could be political opinion. So same sort of things that you want to think about. Why do you hold this opinion? Why is it important to your identity? Is there a political group? When did you join? How did you join? Who introduced you to this group? What was their name? Do you remember the first meeting you went to? You know, what did you do? Did you just attend meetings? Did you pass out flyers? Were you involved in a more significant way? Was there a position? Did you have a membership card? Did you sign any petitions? Did you go to protests? When did you go to these protests? Have you voted? You know, all of this information is important. You can't just say, I am part of this political party. More details are needed to know to really establish that this information is true. And then finally, there's a particular social group. A particular social group can be a lot of things. It could be based on your sexual orientation. It could be based on a disability. It could be based on a health condition. It could be based on perhaps, you know, links you have to certain, you know, it could be maybe your familial relation. There's quite a few things there. So if you are doing this based on your particular social group, you need to show that you're part of this group, that this group is somewhat separate from other people within your country, and that your country regards this group as different, again, than the general population, you know, perhaps doesn't give help to them, or very likely persecutes them, harms them, and that's why, you know, you're applying for asylum. Okay, so once you have really established what this particular social group is, then you need to, what I suggest you do is to list everything that has happened to you because you belong to that group. And first, just start making a list. And think about all the harms, including things that maybe don't seem so serious at first. So words, things that have been said to you, and who said these things to you. Feelings that you've experienced being part of this group. Have you been depressed? Have you considered suicide? Have you had to see a therapist because of this? And then, of course, you want to think about other harms, any physical harm, any physical violence, any sexual violence. Were you ever put into jail? Were you ever threatened with arrest? So what was the harm that happened? Now, for each of these harms, there's somebody who did it to you. So who is this person who harmed you? And how do you know that they were harming you because of the social group? So if, for example, if you were assaulted by someone, how do you know you were assaulted because of your religion? Or how do you know you were assaulted because of your political opinion? Were they saying things to you, you know, derogatory things about your religion as they were harming you? Was the place in which they harmed you, was it a place of worship? And so because they were harming you at this place of worship or close to this place of worship, you know that they were harming you because of who you are, right? You have to make this connection very, very clear. Don't assume that the asylum officer or the immigration judge knows. You need to say it. And then, did you seek any protection after you were harmed? Why or why not? And how did it affect you afterwards? Okay, so maybe you were physically assaulted. How long did the injuries, how long were you, how long after that did you not feel well? Was it, for a month you couldn't do certain things? Do you have permanent damage because of something? Let's say your arm was hurt and you don't have the same mobility in this arm anymore, even a year later, and you can't do certain things because of this. Let's say it was psychological harm, but you got so afraid that you no longer were leaving your apartment anymore, or you had to stop going to work, so not just what happened to you at that time, but what were the lingering effects of it is also important to think about. So after you make this list, put it aside for a few days and then go back and think about what you've written, and are there more details that you remember? Or as you look at it again, do you see, oh, no, that's not right. That's not when it happened. It didn't happen in 2015. It actually happened in 2016. And I remember it because it was my niece's 20th birthday. Like our memories are not perfect, and our memories get worse and worse as we get older, and our memories certainly are not perfect when we've gone through something really difficult. So think about it again, what happened, and see if any of the details are wrong. And really think about anything else that might have happened. Sometimes our things that happen to you become normalized because they happen every day, but it doesn't mean that they're okay. So, let's say it becomes normal that you are harassed verbally by a police officer every day. Even if there's no physical harm from that, that's important to talk about. So, really think about anything else that might have happened to you and sort of list it. Okay, and then, put it aside and then go back to it. And now that you have all your harms listed out, see if you can put this into some sort of order and see if there's more context that you can give that will give sense to it. And again, think about the accuracy of what you're writing. And if you're not sure, just say you don't know. I think it was this. It was approximately this time. If there's no way for you to remember, it's really hard for me to remember because I just blocked this part of my life out, or my memory has not been good since this time, or whatever it is. Don't make up something because you think you need to. Give the best answer you can, and you can always say, I think it was this, or approximately this. Okay, now that you've thought about everything that happened to you because of your protected ground, expand and think about what has happened to other people because of the same ground. Obviously, you're in the United States, so you were able to escape, and although you may have experienced extreme and severe harm, there are very likely people who are still currently living in your home country who are continuing to face that harm, or even perhaps people who are in prison or dead, depending on what the harm is. So think about other people, your other family members, your classmates, your colleagues, your friends. Did they also face this harm? And then you want to try to write about that as best as you can, right? Of course, you won't know, you might not know all of the details, but to explain what's happened to other people further shows what the conditions are like there, and also shows what the conditions would be like if your asylum application is not approved and you need to return to your home country. So after you think about yourself, your friends, your family, your colleagues, and other people, you want to look for country conditions that also show this. And when I say country conditions, I mean news articles, other sources that talk about what is happening. It might not exist, but very likely there should be something out there that exists. So try to find this information. It doesn't have to be a ton of information, but if you can find some information that corroborates, again, corroborates means it's like evidence that shows what you're saying is true. If there is some of this information that you can include, that could be important. Yeah. And this could be based on the harm. This could also be based on other things. Like let's say you couldn't, let's say you were being harmed, but you didn't leave for some time because a civil war had broken out in your country, right? You can corroborate this quite easily, right? Because I'm sure there would be an article out there explaining what was going on at this time, right? There's so much going on in the world all the time, and nobody has all of that information, right? So again, it's up to you to provide that information to the asylum officer. And of course, don't forget to write about the police and the government. So did you try to get official protection? And if you didn't, why? Would it be more dangerous? Would it be ineffective? Ineffective meaning it wouldn't have helped. Why? What are the reasons that you believe that? Have other people gone through this? Is this something that, there's country conditions corroborating this? Did you go in the past and it wasn't useful, or did you go in the past and it made it worse? And then on the other side, if you did go to the police, what did they do? Did they follow up with you? Did you follow up with them? And how was it not helpful, right? Because if you can get help in your home country, or if your government can help you, you won't qualify for asylum, right? So asylum is, this thing is happening to me because of my protected ground, and there's no way to stay safe because my government isn't going to help me, so I have to go. Okay. So then put this all together, and this should be the beginning part of your asylum story. Again, information about your entry into the US, perhaps you don't need to include it, but definitely what is your social group, and definitely what is the past harm. Now you need to think about the future, because you're here in the United States, and what would happen to you if you went back, if your asylum application was not approved? And how do you know this? If you were receiving threats in the past, have these threats continued? Or have these threats happened to other people that you know in your home country? If it's based on a political situation, has the political situation changed, or has it gotten worse? What is going on in your home country that makes it that it's still dangerous for you to return because of who you are? So same thing, list out everything that you think might happen. This will be a much shorter list than the past harm, because all of these are potential things that might happen. But then again, why do you think these things are going to happen to you? Because of what happened before? Is it because it's happened to other people that you know, or other things that you've read about in the newspapers? So for everything that you think might happen to you, you need to explain the reasons why. And very, very importantly, when you're thinking about your future harm, could you relocate within your home country? So, you applied for asylum, so you left, and now you're in the United States. But would it have been possible for you to go somewhere else within your home country and be safe? And if not, you need to explain this. So if it's the government that is harming you, it's presumed that there's nowhere that you can be safe, because the government controls, the whole country. But if you're not being harmed specifically by the government, you really need to say why you can't go somewhere else and be safe. So why would it be unreasonable, or why would it be not possible? Perhaps because of your age or your health, you can't live somewhere else. Very importantly, evidence that persecution happens anywhere in your country. So, whether in the city that you lived in, or another city, in the capital, or in the country, it's the same situation everywhere. An inability to fit in or blend anywhere else. So perhaps you live in a country where different regions really are separated out by maybe ethnicity or tribal affiliation or religion, and it's just not realistic for you to be able to go anywhere else. That would be important to explain. And finally, could your persecutor find you? So how big is the country? What are the resources of the persecutor? Is the persecutor affiliated with the government and could find you? Every situation is going to be different. Your story is going to be specifically what it is in your story, but do think about this. Why is relocation unreasonable? And explain this in your story as well, because you will be asked about this. And finally, maybe there's some other serious harm. This you might want to really speak with a attorney about. It's an alternative way to get asylum. If you faced past persecution and you're not really going to face any future persecution, but your past harm was so severe, like you shouldn't have to go back. But think about it. If there's other harm that you might face, it may be something you also want to include in your story. And finally, maybe you want to give a little information about what you're doing in the US, right? So good moral character, discretion, it's not absolutely necessary, but it's good to show. And why do you feel safer in the United States, and why would you need to be granted asylum in the US for your safety? So it doesn't have to be super long, but maybe just a little information about what you're planning to do in the US if granted asylum. So that, when you do all of that, and again, it's going to take time, now you've completed your story. So if you have a friend that you trust, you may want to have them read it to give some feedback. Mainly, is it clear? Is it organized? Are there things that they don't understand? When you write something for yourself, it's not always understandable to somebody else. So it's good to have someone else read it, again, that you trust, who can give you some feedback. And finally, after you complete your story, look at your I-589 application again and make sure all the information is the same, or that they're consistent. specifically look at your schooling and your employment history and your address history. Does everything line up? Is everything correct? Again, our memory is not great. So you may have thought that you wrote information correctly, but then when you go back and you look at it, it wasn't quite correct. So this is a good time to go through your I-589 and make changes there if necessary. Or maybe your I-589 is correct and now you can make some changes in your story. But so everything is consistent. After you do that, again, I'd say just put your story aside for a week and then look at it again. With time away, you look at it again with fresh eyes and you see things that you wouldn't necessarily see when you're in the midst of writing something. Does it read clearly? Is it sufficiently detailed? Can you talk about all this stuff? Would you be able to testify to it? Does it express your emotions? Does it sound like your words? Does it explain what you're afraid of, and especially that the harm you face is because of that, right? Always the harm is connected to this aspect of your identity, your protected ground. Does that come through? And then, use this story as a template to see what sort of evidence you can get. You don't need to submit evidence at the same time that you file your 589. You can submit it before your asylum interview, but the story is a good way to see what is available. And the story, so for example, let's say you went to the hospital. Can you get a hospital report? If you can't get the hospital report, you may want to even just include in the story, I can't get it because this. Explain why you can't get certain things. And then this story also is a good template to see what you can get. Maybe you can get letters from people who know what you went through, letters from people who experienced the same harm. You don't need a ton of additional evidence, but you should have additional evidence, especially evidence that an asylum officer would think is reasonable to get. So like they would think it's reasonable if you went to the hospital that there's a report. So that's one thing you should look for. And if it doesn't exist, explain why. Good luck with this. It's not an easy thing to undertake, but you certainly can. So take your time writing it. Don't try to write it all in one day. Remember that you can always add in more information at the interview. So, perhaps you submit your story with the I-589 with the main details of what happened. You can certainly testify to more at your interviews. So it doesn't have to be perfect at that time. But, try to make the story as good as you can. And remember, whatever you put in your story, make sure it's accurate, right? Because if at your interview, then you say something different than what's in your story, this would be something that would open up some questioning. And always be mindful of the 1-year filing deadline. Okay, there are exceptions to the 1-year filing deadline, but if you've arrived here and you want to apply for asylum, make sure that you apply within 1 year. Okay. So those are our tidbits for how to write a good story. I hope it's been helpful, and I wish you all the best with your asylum applications.